interesting. Obviously, they had made this decision because they want to encourage authenticity and, helping women feel more comfortable, I believe, in their natural beauty. I also feel like just an underlying thing might just be them wanting to also see, like, how do you actually look? Damn. Without these extensions, because guys, the truth of the matter is, right, a woman will look different with each hairstyle. Like, I'm honestly telling reasons as to why it is that us as women, we've been so conditioned, right, to have extensions, particularly wigs or weaves, right? And I was on some, as much as it's great that they are gearing this towards the woman, we shouldn't leave the men behind, because men also play a huge part as to why it is that maybe a woman can do a particular hairstyle. And I'll give a particular example. I remember one lady on social media mentioned how she will get approached by a different caliber of men depending on the hairstyle that she has. And I was like, no, it can't be. I think that even cultural appropriation itself is, in a way, an indication of how just influential the Black culture is. Are we appreciated accordingly because of this influence and how we are setting this trend? Not necessarily, and not always, but yet again, it does not take away from the fact that we are a significant influencer and trendsetter within the space, right? Hello everyone, and welcome back to another great episode. I'm so happy to have you guys here and to be joining me on this conversation that we're about to have today. So recently, I think it was the beginning of this month, Miss Ivory Coast released an announcement basically stating that for their pre-selection stage, their contestants have to come with their natural hair. Their hair could be shaven off, it could be braided up, it could be in its natural form and glory, but whatever the case is, they mustn't have any wigs or weaves, and I found this so interesting. Obviously, they had made this decision because they want to encourage authenticity and helping women feel more comfortable, I believe, in their natural beauty. I also feel like just an underlying thing might just be them wanting to also see, like, how do you actually look without these extensions? Because guys, the truth of the matter is, right, a woman will look different with each hairstyle. Like, I'm honestly telling you, like, look at any of your friends, like your girlfriends, like social media pages, and you'll see, like, hair can change a woman, okay? So I can understand, right? It's just like, we want to make sure we give her the best choice. And as great as this is, it made me think about a lot of things. I think one of the things it made me think about is obviously the fact that in as much as this is a push to encourage women to be more authentic and natural, it had me thinking about the many reasons as to why it is that us as women, we've been so conditioned, right, to have extensions, particularly wigs or weaves, right? And I was on some, as much as it's great that they are gearing this towards the woman, we shouldn't leave the men behind, because men also play a huge part as to why it is that maybe a woman can do a particular hairstyle. And I'll give a particular example. I remember one lady on social media mentioned how she will get approached by a different caliber of men depending on the hairstyle that she has. And I was like, no, it can't be. But I actually tried it out. Like, I remember there was one time I had on one of my long wigs, and it was just like all straightened out, and the girl was like dolled up. And the men, I was just like, and it was such a vast difference to the men that will approach me compared to when I have my afro out and it's all in all its glory. You know what I'm saying? And that really made me realize that to a certain degree, we most probably are also influenced by what it is that we do, depending on how it is that will be perceived and accepted or received by the society that we are in. that's the first thing, right? But then the second thing for me that came to mind is really wanting to make a deep dive into the history of, women's hair, African women's hair, and just how it is that we got to this point where we are really, so taken, right, with the wigs and the weaves. And obviously, I believe one of the American comedians, I'm forgetting his name right now, but he did, is it Chris Rock, I think, he did a whole little documentary, talking about how, the wig and weave industry is like $1 billion weave or $1 billion rather business or industry. And for me, it just really made me realize just how many, Black women actually resort to this as a way of accessorizing themselves. So without wasting more time, I just want to get into this discussion, and I'm going to separate it into two things. The first section of this episode will be discussing a brief history. I just want to give a timeline of hair history in Africa, and then this is also going to be followed then by me just sharing some of my opinions on what I believe this whole journey says about us as African women and our connection to hair, whether it is our natural hair, whether it is extensions, and most probably what the future might look like when it comes to this $1 billion industry. Is it going to continue to grow? Is it going to decrease through such initiatives? What can we actually look forward to when it comes to African women and their hair? So let's get into the history, right? I want to take us to ancient Africa. So ancient Africa, that is your pre 1000, I think it's BC. And this is in the times of Egypt, right? When Egypt was ruling, when Egypt was still the empire that it was. And I think in doing my research, I found it so interesting how Egyptians wore wigs pretty regularly, right? The wigs were either worn by the pharaohs, they were worn by priests, they were worn by the elite of the society, and it was a way of showing stature as well as articulating status, right? And they had different kind of wigs, right? So some would be just elaborate head dresses, others would be hair extensions. And as always, this episode is going to be filled with not a lot of stats, but a lot more pictures. So just look this side to see the pictures of everything that I'm talking about, because it is pretty interesting when you actually take a step back and you look at everything just from a holistic point of view. So that is in Egypt, right? And also when it comes to these wigs would be dyed using henna. They would be perfumed with various oils, and they were also worn for such purposes such as hygiene, right? So that is them. Then we have what I would categorize as early sub-Saharan Africa, when we were really now being considered as this vast one collective continent, right? And here we see how different cultures across the continent would use, right, braiding or threading or natural hair extensions as a way to create symbolic hairstyles. And some, cultures would use these, extensions as a way of adding volume, and they use animal hair, or some of them would use plant fiber, just different kind of things. And again, these hairstyles would symbolize different things. Some would symbolize maturity, some would indicate the tribe you came from, others would indicate your spiritual beliefs as well. Then we will have medieval Africa time. That's from 1000 to the early 1500s there. And here we see that we are now having a bit of an influence and a change in terms of our relationship with hair, simply because of how we are now involved with the trade with East and Middle East, with the Middle East as well as with Asia. So that trading also now introduced grooming materials such as combs and various kind of oils that now are being used on our hair, right? But another thing that we see is that hair now starts being decorated, right, quite extensively. We're seeing the use of shells, we're seeing the use of beads to basically just make the hairstyles that were already very elaborate, just make them more decorative, make them more beautiful. This is then also followed by what you call this, a suggestion, right, of there being extensions, so to extend the hair's natural length. this is in that time period. Then I'll move on to the time period of the transatlantic slave trade, which really, as with a lot more other things, deterred completely like the development and the progressive journey that Africans were making when it came to their hair and the kind of hairstyles that they would have and what they would symbolize and the kind of relationship that they would have with it, right? And we see this because of how, first things first, is that the Atlantic slave trade would shave off slaves' hair, right? And this was obviously a way of dehumanizing them. And again, it was dehumanizing them because they also had a very explicit understanding of how our hairstyles were, in a very, unique and different way, a part of our pride and joy, right? So again, in this way of just objectifying, the slaves to really understand their place, they would shave their hair. But another thing that would happen is that the missionaries coming in, with the religion of Christianity and the indoctrination of the religion, it saw people, now wearing various like head wraps or wigs within church settings, because as we know, there are parts within, the Christian doctrine that speak about head covering, right? Now I want to move on to the early colonial like mid-colonial era. This is when we now start seeing a drastic change, and this drastic change is basically being this huge drive to assimilate, right? To assimilate to the West and their ideals and what it is that they perceive as standards of beauty. And so we see that there is a great push to tame African hair, because as we know, our hair, it defies gravity, baby. It's proper magic. Okay, so it's, I think in the context or in the ideals of wanting to make Africans more European, the hair had to be tamed. So here is also when we start seeing the groundwork being laid for a lot of like different products that will modify and manipulate the hair, such as chemical hair treatments, relaxers, etc. But also because a lot of Africans realized that to get a higher like access or easier access to like greater status, or to be able to be educated in these missionaries, they had to adopt Western styles of which included wigs and straightening of their hair. And then I want to now move on to the early 1700s, where we are now seeing modernization and globalization taking place across the board. So here now we are seeing that professional settings are really now urging women, Black women particularly, or African women in this case, to again tame their hair, because their hair is unruly and unprofessional when it is in its natural state, right? And so again, African women start pushing to mimic more of the European hairstyles as much as they possibly can. Also, there's a mass now production of wigs as they become more accessible, particularly for African wealthier women. A great example of a person who really influences this shift and this gradual movement of wigs and relaxers can be seen with the business a billionaire, which was Madam C.J. Walker, and just how a great deal of her products not only influenced America, but they also did come and reach the African shores as well. And then we're going to move on to the period of independence, and in this period of independence, we're seeing that there is a huge kind of revival, right, of African hair and us going back to its original authentic form. And so we're seeing that the Afro and the natural hair movement really start taking off in a lot of regions, right? But also at the same time, wigs are also growing rapidly. But we're seeing that, okay, there is now another narrative that's kind of being pushed to say that our hair is black, it's beautiful, it's bold as it is, and it should not be tamed, as we were previously told. Now, I will then move on to late 1700s, so that's your 1970s to your 1990s there. And again, we are seeing a drastic rise in not only now wigs, but now in weaves, right? And now, if you don't know what the difference is, right? So a wig is something that you can just simply attach on. I'll try to see if I can like put a little video here, but you can just like attach it on, you know, you can pin it in to just make sure that it's secure and it sits well. And a weave, though, it's normally sewn in, and there are various different ways now in which, you know, weaves are like sewn in and properly just attached to the woman's hair. There's like now tape ins, there's like micro what you call this, weaves. Like there's so many different styles now, but essentially the weave is now properly attached to the head, and it will stay a longer period compared to the wig that you'll just put on for those few hours and then you'll take it off and, you know, go back to your natural state. So here now in this period we are seeing the introduction of weaves, and how they are also, alongside the relaxers and the wigs, are really starting to compete a great deal when it comes to, you know, the desire of African women and how they want their hair to look and be presented. Also, extensions become quite a thing. We're also seeing that media, music, and movies that are coming from the West are really pushing a particular agenda when it comes to what is actually beautiful when it comes to Black women and our hair. And another interesting thing that happens at this time is that within this rapid growth of the weave industry, a lot of this hair is imported from Asia, making Asia become a very big business partner. Just want to take a bit of like a detour here and just say one of the interesting things I found with Chris Rock's you know, documentary is that when there is a segment where he goes to India, it's just finding out about the different ways in which this hair is sourced. And for me, that was quite a shocker, because, you know, I think growing up you just think that, oh, must just be produced in a factory. You don't really make the connection that when they say Brazilian or Indian or Peruvian, that this is actually from somebody else's head. And many a times, like these, like this hair will either be sourced by through various rituals that they do where, you know, the Asian woman cuts their hair for that particular ritual, or they'll be sourced, I even heard some cases that they'll be sourced from dead bodies, you know, because some cultures in Asia, they don't bury the body. They like will put it in a bit of like a boat thing and will float away. And so obviously wherever that body ends up, those people will take that hair and go sell it. Others will be women who are wanting to sell the hair because of how they can make a quick buck by, you know, selling their hair depending on its name. So I was just like, this is quite a lot, you know, but a very informative documentary. If you haven't watched it, definitely check it out, because for me it definitely changed my whole entire perspective when it comes to the idea of like wigs and weaves. Now I want to move on to like modern day. So modern day is like the 2000 till present, and one thing I really appreciate about this time that we are in is, again, just like this re-insurgence of like the natural hair movement. And we've been seeing how there's been a lot of pushback, not only just to the wigs and the weaves, but also just pushback in terms of how Black women's hair are seen within the professional setting, and why it is that they might not be considered beautiful in contrast to hair that requires us or makes us seem as though we are assimilating to a different culture than our own. So in as much as many women still prefer the wigs and the weaves, we are seeing that there's now like a lot of versatility and a lot more options, a lot more freedom of expression when it comes to women and what it is that they want to do when it comes to their hair. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to share this background is to be able to show how our history depicts the fact that we have had, as African women, or rather let me say as Black women, we have had a very complex relationship when it comes to our hair. You know, one of the interesting things I heard about, I was watching a particular video. I'll put it in the description here below, and this gentleman was sharing how Ethiopia, when colonization was happening and many of the other European countries were colonizing the different parts of the continent, their men, when they went to warfare, intentionally put out an announcement to not cut their hair. And the reason for that is, like, as we now know, is that our hair also has is like an extension of our nervous system. So it's like they like our hair is like antennas in a sort of a way. They can help us, you know, tell danger from like a mile away. And these armies within Ethiopia were essentially, you know, enlightened to this information, and so they were not defeated in any battle because of how, well, some of the speculations was that it could be because of how none of the men actually cut their hair. So they were able to detect danger from miles away and ensure that they are ever prepared for the enemy that was about to advance on them. And I found that to be like so interesting, because another thing we must understand is that whenever you put on a wig or weave or even these kind of extensions, there is a certain way in which you are covering your hair, covering your antenna per se, if you're going to look at it from that spiritual point of view. But beyond the spiritual, we can see that even at a physical point of view, there's a lot of like symbolism that we have been able to use our hair to articulate to various other people, whether it was for status, whether it was for community, whether it was for age, whether it was for identity, various different things. And this then brings me back to the understanding that our natural hair, prior to the influence of colonization, was seen as a form of identity and a great sense of pride, whether like how I stated previously, whether it was for the reasons of like spirituality or for social status, there is a great deal of identity that has been attached to our hair, and I believe continues to be attached to it with the rise again of the natural hair movement. Another thing I found very interesting was realizing that the culture of braiding and having extensions is not something that was just introduced during colonization, but has long existed within our different cultures at various times. And for me, I found this to be just very interesting, and it really made me wonder that had we not been interrupted by colonization, how would like African beauty when it comes to hair, how would that look like? One of my favorite things to see is when like traditional weddings are happening, and to see how the brides are styled, whether they are styled in terms of like their natural hair, or whether they are styled in terms of like the various ornaments and like various elements that are put in their hair to elaborate it in a decorative manner. I always find this to be just so fascinating and beautiful, as it represents how we really did have a different understanding and an idea of what beauty was. And so for me, it brings me to the point again to just basically say that we must understand that a lot of the things that we experience now within our African continent is a result of a very successful colonial project, right? So we understand that from this episode, the colonial project did a number. They literally did a phenomenal job. And this is not me like just like tapping, this is just me being sarcastic at this point, but really they really did a number on us in how they redefined our own standards of beauty to be those that will assimilate to European standards. And again, referring to the example I gave earlier, it's not just us women as well who see these standards of beauty in terms of you having to wear a wig, or your hair being relaxed, or having a weave, or having extensions. It's not just that, even the men themselves, right, they respond differently to women who have a certain kind of hairstyle, which also just says a lot about the indoctrination that we have undergone as a people when it comes to what it is that we identify and we perceive as beautiful. Another unfortunate thing for me, which I think something that we are still kind of like trying to break the shackles off from, is the understanding of how our hair and the journey that it's been on, especially from colonization till present, there's been a great deal of assimilation and true survival. And I use these two words specifically within the professional context, right? With this understanding that, our hair in its natural state has not necessarily been well received or accepted within these Western, or rather modern, professional working spaces. And it's not just even in the professional sense. I believe that even in other spaces that are just outside of the home, there has been a lot of like tension and pushback when it comes to our natural hair. I remember a few years ago, there was a young South African young lady, and in high school she had went with her natural hair, and it caused the whole saga. I'll put the article here, but it caused the whole saga, and it pointed out the issue of why it is that when this young girl chooses to wear her natural hair, yes, in all its fullness, in its glory, in its volume, that there had to be this tension, right? There had to be these very racist attitudes towards her deciding to do that, whereas if she had gone a more acceptable and taken a hairstyle that seems more tamed, there wouldn't have been any, opposition to that whatsoever. And again, it just points to the fact that as women, for the sake of surviving within these spaces, we've just chosen to assimilate for the sake of just making it easier for social mobility, for us to be able to access education, employment, and the rest, which is just so unfortunate and is very, very heartbreaking. I think another thing that plays immensely into this is obviously the role of media. And with globalization, the world has literally become one small village. We all are like literally peeping into each other's backyards at this point. And it's just so unfortunate that we have associated the development of the West to be the standard in everything, right? I always say this in my previous videos, that how growing up, watching the videos or the music videos in the West, you'd see the girls who are really like petite and much slimmer, and they had like this beautiful, like long, relaxed hair that was like so straight, and just like, the vent in your aura, just, just so beautiful. That is what we associated as beautiful. That is what we associated to, to be acceptable, especially acceptable to the male gaze, right? And yeah, media has really continued to perpetuate this in various ways. But I genuinely thank God for social media and influencers who have played like an exceptional role in not only just pushing back on these ideas that we had grown to accept and take as the norm, but in also introducing a great deal of awareness and education on how we can maintain our hair, on how it is that we can have these things of wigs and weaves and extensions not be what defines us, but rather tools and accessories that we can use to further, support, and accentuate our own hair in various different ways. And I say accentuate because of how we now understand that these kind of hairstyles are not protective hairstyles, right? They also allow for us to have versatility. They also allow for us to have convenience. I know for me, particularly in the summer, I prefer having, these kind of extensions or braids because it just makes it much more easier to manage in the heat. Also, I love swimming. I'm like such a water baby. So when I go into the water, I know I don't have to be stressing about like shrinkage. I don't have to be stressing, is my hair like going to be fine? Because it's in a protective format. So I just know that as long as I put my right products, I just give it a good wash, we're good to go again, right? So this kind of education wasn't something that was predominantly there before. Now we are understanding that these kind of options are just that. They're just options. They are not something that is a must for a Black African woman. That I want us to understand, and maybe I will leave it at this, is that our hair as Black women is also a cultural expression. I always find it so interesting when our white counterparts also want to partake in the various trends that we do with our hair. And it really goes to show how as Black women, as African women, we've really taken ownership of the narrative and really ensured that we are now the ones who dictate what we want this hair to do for us, how we wanted to express our identity, express our culture, express just like our Africanness in the most beautiful, diverse of ways. Like I think it's been fascinating to see the booming of like the braids industry and just like all the different things that now one can do with braids, and how other cultures have in various different ways have tapped in. Yes, we can have a conversation about cultural appropriation, but I think that even cultural appropriation itself is in a way an indication of how just influential the Black culture is. Are we appreciated accordingly because of this influence and how we are setting this trend? Not necessarily, and not always, but yet again, it does not take away from the fact that we are a significant influencer and trendsetter within the space, right? And I think for me, this is important to note, because even though there are these societal pressures, right, that basically say that a woman who has got this kind of hairstyle will get this kind of response or this kind of reaction from the society that she's in, even though those societal pressures exist, it does not mean that women, black women or African women, have not been, navigating this to still serve them and convenience them in whatever way that they believe it needs to, and for me, I think that is amazing. So I think with that, I will leave it there. But just the final thing I just wanted to add on is to just say that, kudos to not only just Ivory Coast as well, but Burkina Faso also, they banned, the wearing of wigs by, judges, which also I just didn't understand, because I'm just like, guys, it's Africa, it's hot. Why are we wearing wigs? Like, no, let's not do that. And imagine some of the ladies would be wearing the white wig on top of like their wig or weaves, and I'm just like, girl, are you not on fire? You know what I'm saying? But anyways, I think what I want to end off when it comes to this section is just to basically highlight the fact that when it comes to us changing these kind of narratives, it is important that we engage everyone. So in as much as right now, Miss Ivory Coast has particularly targeted women, I think they have a great opportunity right now to open up a broader conversation to both men and women, young and old, on how it is that they understand beauty to be associated to particular hairstyles and why it is that is the case. But more importantly, how it is that they as a society wish to basically have their own standards of beauty be redefined, not only within this pageant industry, but just across the board. And I think in them doing so, it will hopefully encourage other, not only just pageants, but other, beauty industries to really start being more diverse in what it is that they present to all of us as beautiful, as acceptable, as the standard, as admirable. Because as we all know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And honey, the eye of the beholder, there are many eyes, okay? There are many beholders. So yeah, guys, with that, we will move on to women across Africa. Okay, we are in Women Across Africa. Because of time, I'm just gonna share one quick story. I'm hoping I can just breeze through it without having too many opinions, because me, I'm a yapper. Okay, I can yap your way. Okay, but this Women Across Africa article is going to take us to Zimbabwe, and it's highlighting an issue that is very near and dear to me. As you guys would have realized by now, I have a lot of issues that are near and dear to me. Okay, blame it on me being a neurodivergent. Okay, it just is what it is. But anyways, this article is talking about postpartum depression and marital issues with women in Zimbabwe. Personally speaking, I don't think that this is only limited to women in Zimbabwe. Obviously, it's just that the article was particularly from that country, so hence the focus being there. But one thing I want to share, right, before I get into my opinions, it's just like a few things that this article highlighted. It will be linked in the description, so you guys can go read it for yourselves about what it is that what you call this postpartum depression can do in terms of negatively affecting a marriage. And one of the things is emotional disconnect, which obviously makes sense because the mother is suffering a great deal of like mental challenges. Another can be increased conflict in the house, because obviously there will be that misunderstanding. There's a lot of emotions that are currently heightened within this time. Another thing is lack of support, and one thing that postpartum does is that it makes women feel very isolated. And then also another contributing factor to postpartum and it being worsened within a mother can be financial strain. Babies can be expensive. We are seeing how economically a lot of African countries there's a bit of bit of toughness there. We are going through it, but those factors can, add and contribute to a woman, feeling and going through this, and some of the challenges, right, that rise up when it comes to addressing the issue of, postpartum depression is obviously stigma, and stigma, we know, often leads to there being silence. So women are not encouraged to basically say that, hey, like, I'm not feeling as happy and jovial, as elated as everyone says the season of my life should be making me feel. You feel as though as a mother you have failed, essentially. Also, there's another issue of like there being limited access to care, and this is a problem because obviously that means that there's not enough education, there's not enough awareness. So a woman can be going through this and she doesn't even know what's happening. She doesn't even know why her emotions are feeling so imbalanced, why mentally she's just not feeling like herself, and she's just feeling very lost in this new season of her life that she's in. Also, another issue that makes this issue very difficult to address is uninvolved fathers. And uninvolved fathers, I think, really stems from a cultural point of view, and I will just give a bit of a deep dive there in a minute, before I go there, I just want to give like some of the solutions that this article highlighted, and that was spousal education, couples therapy, community support programs, and then obviously improved access to mental care mental care facilities. Wow, like English has a way of just embarrassing a person, hey. But yeah, anyways, now going back to my point of uninvolved fathers. Now, I personally am not yet a mother, but I am a very involved auntie, okay, to all my beautiful nieces and nephews that my amazing older sisters have been able, to gift to us in this family. And so for me, I have been able to just, as I like to say, vicariously live through them. I believe until my own season, when I will become a wife and a mother, then I obviously will be able to be better versed. But just from this experience of being an outsider, looking in, one thing I can definitely say is that not having a a very involved support system will definitely play into a woman's ability to how she navigates her postpartum journey. I often say that we really, when it comes to the issue of uninvolved fathers, we really underestimate how culture in this particular sense has not caught up with modernization. What do I mean by this? Back in the day, I don't know about other African countries, but I know in a lot of South African, ethnic groups, what would happen when a woman would give birth is that for the first 3 months, maybe even longer, she would go back to her maiden home and be with her own mother, be with her own aunt, and they would essentially throughout that period not only just nurse her and make sure that she heals and she recovers from this very traumatic event. Because guys, also birth, like I've said, I've never given birth. I am not yet a mother. That season is still coming, but it's just like from everything I've read and just the University of TikTok, you really see that this is a life and death event. Like the things that your body has to go through to bring life into the earth, it's not a joke, okay? But anyways, I'm not there. Where I am at is that these women would have a very structured support system that would ensure that they heal, they get back to themselves, but more importantly, they themselves are mothered into motherhood, right? They themselves are taught and they are basically given the necessary, education on how it is to tend to a child, on what to do when the child needs this, on what this kind of cry and this kind of whine of a child necessarily means, right? So that would mean that she would not be alone. So even when she did go back to her own, house, she'd feel prepared, she'd feel ready. And I bring this up because I've seen this common a meme come up which basically says that a mother not only births a child, but she also births herself because she's also a mother for the first time, right? And for me, like this, every time I read this, it always strikes like very deeply at how like this is such a new chapter. Pause, we just need to check if the mic is on. But this is such a new chapter and it's such a different season for the woman who is experiencing it for the first time, hence why culture would have these particular systems in place, right? Now In again South African context, I'm not too sure about how it has happened in the other African countries, but I know in South Africa this kind of system was completely disturbed when, especially not only just colonization, maybe when we started having segregation, we started having apartheid, because what would happen is that the woman, one, she would be alone in the home, because why? And in many cases the men would go to the urban areas or the cities. That's where the works would be, the mines and all the other like informal work would be, and then the woman would stay back home in the rural areas or in the village to tend to the homestead, right? So when the man left, she would be left alone, right? And so when she is now pregnant and she is now having to birth her child or child, she can't leave, because who's going to look after the home? Because the father's way, the father is now in the city, and in often cases in South Africa they would be working 9 months out of a year and only return for those 3. And obviously in those 3, like, we don't know if she's giving birth, we don't know what stage she is with the baby, but essentially she would have to now essentially be alone, because there would not be that opportunity for her to go back to her own maternal side of the family to be tended to. And we see how this has kind of like continued onwards in modernization. Now, I'm not saying in today's day and age that men are now leaving their homes for 9 months out of the year, but what I am saying is that it has now become like a mental clocking out, I feel like, of fathers, in that, because maybe these fathers grew up in houses where their mothers essentially, because guys, for us in South Africa, like, we are still a very young democracy. I think we are only 30 years. So there are some people who have grown up in apartheid, or were born in that time, right? So they have witnessed their mothers essentially tend to the home, do the cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing, all on their own, and dad just after work comes back, sits down, waits for dinner, maybe reads the paper, watches the news, and goes to sleep. Like, is not at all active in like putting the kids to bed, making sure that they have their breakfast, their lunch, and all these things ready in the morning. None of that, right? So can we see how now what at first during the times of segregation and apartheid was a situation that was imposed upon because of circumstance has now become the norm, even though modernization and democracy has kindly changed the black family dynamic, right? And so I bring this up because I feel as though this is one example that illustrates why it is that we still have this culture of uninvolved fathers. And it's very unfortunate because, like how I've said, we no longer have these cultural practices whereby women can now leave their lives for like a whole 3-4 months to go and be with their maternal home. It just doesn't make sense in this day and age. Women have to stay at home, stay in their houses to tend to everything, right? There's bills to be paid. In most households, both the men and the woman are working. And so even though the woman, yes, she might be on maternity leave, there are some cases where women don't have the full 4 months of maternity leave, unfortunately, depending obviously on their working conditions that they are in. So for me, I just bring this story up because I think that it highlights obviously a deeper problem than just the issue of postpartum depression. I think it also speaks to just, again, this issue of how I said, of culture unfortunately not being able to catch up to modernization, and as a result leaving its constituents in a very unfortunate very compromising situation. But I also think it speaks again to the need again of like the revisiting of like gender roles, particularly in this kind of new chapter and new season for families, because as we know, a new baby is a lot of work. Okay, like I know with all my nieces and nephews, thankfully, like we are a very like tight-knit family, and we always just tap in to support each other when one of the siblings are having their newborn babies. But in me being able again to just tap in and help my older sisters, I was just like, wow, these new humans be doing a number. Okay, it's a lot, but it's also a beautiful season. So yeah, I hope with that you guys are also able to just have your thoughts also just like sparked in terms of like what other issues this article could be pointing to that but maybe has not explicitly highlighted but can be alluding to. And so thank you guys. With that, we are moving on to Woman of the Week. Okay, we are in Woman of the Week. Woman of the Week. And guys, you know, this Woman of the Week, as much as I'm so happy to share the story, I'm so sad because there isn't a video. And you know, guys, this is one thing actually I do really want to start working on, which is seeing how we can, obviously not now because, you know, the girl doesn't have the means, the resources, the network, and, you know, all of that stuff. But I would love to be able to establish something that affords us the opportunity to document more of these women's stories and document them in video format. And why that particularly? Because we are seeing in this trend of social media that we are in, that is where people's attention is most at, right? People don't read that much. You know, things like TikTok and YouTube really show you how it is that people want to have a visual, right? What you call this visual platform in which they can consume information. So I always am so disheartened at how I come across like these great articles of women who are doing great things, but then when I try to find any kind of video, and it's like, whether it's like on like social media, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's like on a news article, it's just nowhere to be found. But I've just decided that just because I can't find video footage, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to share their stories. It just means that for that particular woman, we'll just have to read out what the article says, and obviously add the description. Guys, I don't know what's happening with my English today, but anyways, but add the link of the article in the description so that you guys can also be able to engage with the content even further. So without wasting time, because we have gone over time, child, okay, this Woman of the Week takes us to, drum roll please, Liberia. You know, if I think of Liberia, I think of that song, Liberian girl, you know that you came and you changed my... Those that know, okay? Michael Jackson did a thing there. But yeah, it takes us to Liberia, and we are meeting a woman by the name of Teresa Nawuko. I hope I said that right. But essentially, she is a phenomenal woman who is in the field of mining and is an engineer. And I loved her story so much because this article was highlighting how in Liberia, mining, engineering, these are just some of like the industries and the careers that are not often pursued for various reasons, and women just don't even look in that direction. So she is like a trailblazer and a trendsetter in how she not only studied to be an engineer but has gotten a degree and is currently working within a mining company. And I really love how, you know, the article just, you know, details her her journey from starting off as an intern to now to being in the place now where she is permanently employed, and how this transition was as a result of her dedication, commitment, and passion. And I think for me, this just illustrates two things. One is the fact that, guys, in Africa there is still like a lot of this like is one of example of how there's still a lot of catching up that we unfortunately still have to do, which is, it's a good and a bad thing, right? But it's also, which will lead me to my second point, it's a bad thing in the sense that it also shows that if at the moment there are still such a limited number of nationals, Liberian nationals who are engineers, who are within this field, it then makes you wonder how many then of the Liberians are actually owners of mines, are actually like leaders of industry when it does come to these very highly contested, competitive, lucrative industries that, you know, most African countries, you know, basically put their GDP depend on for the growth of their like GDP. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that making sense? So yeah, anyways, guys, the story is linked in the bio. I hope that you guys will also give it a read. And, you know, kudos to this young lady who is really showing a lot of young women within her community that it is possible if only you dare to dream and believe. So with that, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I know it was a bit longer than normal, but I didn't want to do like a part 1 and part 2. And as you know, there's always so much to say, but I'm trying to do better. better, okay? Give me some grace, okay? But with that, don't forget to like, share, and please subscribe. And the conversation doesn't end here. It does continue on in the comment section. And also, let's just keep the conversation going. Let's constantly engage. And with that, guys, I will see you soon with another one. Bye.